Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. Belarus is sending mixed signals. The country's strongman leader Alexander Lukashenko freed 52 political prisoners this week, winning partial relief from US sanctions. Yet almost at the same moment, his country was linked to Russian drone incursions into NATO airspace. What is Lukashenko's endgame? Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
Poland recently shot down several Russian drones which breached its airspace. The incident has shaken both Polish politics and society. Yet surprisingly, Warsaw was warned about the drones beforehand by none other than Russia's closest ally, Belarus.
We alerted them to the approach of unknown aircraft to their country's territory. This allowed the Polish side to respond promptly to the actions of the drones by scrambling their forces on duty.
This was not the only gesture of goodwill that Belarus made towards a Western country. Minsk also released 52 political prisoners, Poles and Lithuanians among them, following reported pressure from the side of the United States.
Although today we can rejoice at the release of people from Belarusian prisons, we must not forget that there are still 1,000 political prisoners, including Lithuanians, in the neighboring country.
There can be no mistake, Belarus is still a dictatorship that is deeply in Russia's pocket and under its thumb. But historically, Alexander Lukashenko was seen as someone willing to play both sides prior to the 2020 presidential elections.
And he signed it Donald. That's a rare act of personal friendship.
While it is uncertain whether these gestures signal an attempt from Belarus to begin a long journey towards improving its relations with the West, they are definitely welcome, as they are expected to lead to more prisoners being freed.
And now let's zone in on the east-explaining portion of our show. The United States, becoming actively engaged in securing the release of political prisoners from Belarus, has been warmly welcomed by the international community. Yet in exchange, Belarus gets something that it desperately wants, namely international recognition.
American officials sitting at the same table as Alexander Lukashenko is a sight that not many were expecting to see anytime soon. Yet the US seems adamant that to secure the release of prisoners, it needs to sit at this table face-to-face with the Belarusian leader. John Cole, the US President's Deputy Special Representative for Ukraine, says Washington wants to normalize relations with Belarus. In exchange for the prisoner swap, Washington eased sanctions on Belarus's national carrier Belavia. Cole said that this was only the beginning. But where did this shift in approach to Belarus begin? Many point to Donald Trump's phone call with Lukashenko right ahead of his summit with Vladimir Putin in Alaska in August. The main subject of this call was reportedly the release of over 1,000 political prisoners held by the Minsk regime. But a few weeks prior to the call itself, Minsk had released 16 prisoners, suggesting that these efforts may have already been underway. The latest release of 52 prisoners is regarded as a huge success of this new diplomatic policy, though it is not expected that Belarus will become more pro-Western or even anti-Russian in the long term.
And now we're zooming in on Minsk to explore this story in greater detail. Belarus is walking a tightrope. On one hand, Minsk released 52 political prisoners this week, a gesture that unlocked the partial lifting of US sanctions on the country's national airline, Belavia. Washington called it a step forward. Lukashenko himself said the deal was, and I quote, very important. For a man who has ruled Belarus with an iron grip for 3 decades, it was also a chance to present himself as a pragmatic partner, someone open to dialogue with the West. But on the other hand, while freeing dissidents, Lukashenko allowed his country to play a part in escalating tensions with NATO. At least 19 Russian drones entered Polish airspace this week, some reportedly launched from Belarus. Warsaw branded it an act of aggression. NATO jets had to be scrambled as a result. Yet, curiously, Belarus tipped Poland off beforehand, a move Polish generals described as surprising. So what's really going on here? Well, Lukashenko is trying to play a game. Dependent on Russia for energy and cash, he remains Moscow's ally. But he's also desperate for relief from crippling Western sanctions, which have battered the country's economy since the 2020 crackdown and, later, since its role in Russia's war on Ukraine. By releasing prisoners, Lukashenko signals goodwill to Washington. By warning Poland, he hints at cooperation with NATO. But analysts say there is a catch. Easing sanctions could give Moscow backdoor access to airplane parts and technology through Belarus, tightening the Kremlin's grip, not loosening it. For the West, that raises a hard question. Is Lukashenko turning a corner or simply playing both sides to survive? And now here to shed more light on the issue is Franak Viačorka, Chief Advisor to Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hello.
So first of all, let's talk about the release of political prisoners. I'm told that you had the opportunity to speak to some of them following their release. What were their impressions? What did you learn from them about their ordeal?
Yesterday we met political prisoners in the American embassy, and part of them we took from the border. Many of them are in poor physical and health condition and need immediate medical and psychological aid. People were not prepared for this release. It was a surprise for them. They are shocked. Many of them got deprived of documents, of passport, and when they were brought by Lukashenko's KGB to the border, there were no any documents with them, which made huge trouble for Lithuania, having to quickly provide them with some substitutional documents. So we see the Nikolai Statkevich case, the leader of Social Democrat who refused to leave Belarus. He just left the bus on the border and went to the Belarus direction, and he disappeared right now. Probably KGB took him again. But this shows that these releases are not releases. It's basically deportation of people. And we now talking to Americans, the next batch of people potentially to be released, people must be given the choice to stay or to leave the country, because it's very inhuman tactic, just to kick people out of the country without giving them possibility to stay.
But how do we actually make sure that they are not persecuted by the authorities again? I mean, if they stay, if they choose to stay, even if they don't engage in any sort of political activities, there is always a risk, right? That Lukashenko might think, okay, so once the spotlights are away, we could put them back into prison. And for a while, nobody will notice.
And this is what's happening. Many former political prisoners who served their sentences 3-5 years, they got released after serving the sentence, and a few months later they are brought to prison back. So it's a common practice of the regime. But people must have a choice, because most of Belarusians who don't agree with Lukashenko, they don't want to leave the country. And many people, they chose to stay even knowing the risks. They want to fight the regime from inside the country. Not everyone wants to go into exile. Those who want to flee, we must provide them with the opportunity to flee, to get visa, to get asylum in Poland and Lithuania, which we are very thankful for. But many people want to continue fight inside the country. And the regime of Lukashenko, they want to kick out everyone who disagree with him. It's like in Stalin times, all dictators are doing that, and it's inhumane. This must stop.
So would you say that this release of political prisoners is a humanitarian victory, but politically, well, not so much?
It's a humanitarian victory, and that was the goal of these efforts of President Trump, basically to save lives of people. We spoke with presidential administration. President Trump is personally involved. He calls political prisoners hostages. And this is the campaign operation of releasing hostages from Lukashenko's hands. And we are very grateful for these efforts. But of course, these releases, and this operation, it must not lead to change of policy towards Lukashenko until real systematic change happens in Belarus. Because repressions did not stop. People are being still detained. New prisoners appear. Lukashenko is not normalizing the situation. Yes, he is releasing few people. 3% of political prisoners got released yesterday. Only 3%. But we must insist on the substantial, irreversible change. And we must not lift sanctions until this change, democratic change, happens in Belarus.
Which brings me to my next question. The lifting of sanctions on the Belarusian airline, what danger does it carry? Especially since it was actually achieved by the regime fairly quickly. As you said, 3% of the prisoners have been released, but we still have more than 1,000 still in Belarusian prisons.
I think it's the part of American strategy in these negotiations to give Lukashenko something These Belarus sanctions are not so critical, it's not so dramatic, but it's important for Lukashenko personally, and this is like a step forward to show a goodwill. Lukashenko, you are releasing hostages, okay, we can soften sanctions. But it's not like lifting sanctions completely. What Americans did, it's a general license, it's exception. Basically, sanction is not changing, but there is exception on Belarus, which means at any moment the sanctions can be brought back if Lukashenko again starts to detain people.
Do you think this is going to be closely monitored? Because there have been concerns that were voiced by commentators that if the sanctions are lifted, Belarus will be able to purchase airplane components. Now, Russia also badly needs those components because they are under sanctions too. So this might actually open up an avenue for this sort of unofficial import of airplane parts into Russia, which of course is unintended, but likely to happen. What do you make of that?
Absolutely possible, absolutely. Because Lukashenko and Putin, they use each other to circumvent sanctions. And any softening of sanctions on Russia gives opportunity to Lukashenko to circumvent them through Russia. Like with potash. There are sanctions on potash on Belarus, but no on Russia, and Lukashenko sells potash fertilizers through Russia. Same could happen with Belarus, spare details. So yeah, that's not excluded. Unfortunately, it might happen. And even, these details for Belarus might be used for military purposes. Yes, absolutely. That's why it's important that these sanctions are not completely lifted, that there is control how they could be circumvented, and that European sanctions are in place. And here we praise Polish position, Lithuanian position on continuing pressure and closing the loopholes in the sanction policy.
So Lukashenko is definitely playing a game here, and it's important to actually determine what does he want to achieve. He released political prisoners, at least a small fraction of all those held in prisons in Belarus, but also apparently he has provided information concerning the Russian drone incursion, claiming, and that was actually confirmed by the Polish military too, that the Belarusian side provided Poland with enough data to make a meaningful impact on the operation to intercept these drones. So Lukashenko definitely is sending signals. He's also holding talks with the US administration. What is the end game here?
Oh, come on, sending signals. It's ridiculous. Drones are flying over your territory, and the only thing you do, you just inform, the other side. Of course, it's good that he informed Poland. But in general, the very fact that Lukashenko is not controlling airspace, which is used by Russian military, it shows that he is fully dependent on Russia and he is Putin's puppet. Basically, Russia uses Belarus territory as its own. It's task of Lukashenko to prevent such situation. Drones flying over Belarus and killing Ukrainians, for example, this must not happen at all. This is the problem. And while Lukashenko is serving to Putin, such situations will appear. And this makes Lukashenko co-responsible for everything Russia and Putin is doing.
Isn't Lukashenko likely to use this argument in his negotiations with the US, saying, look, we're actually trying to help our neighbors. We are not so dependent on Russia as people are actually saying. And therefore, they will try to win more concessions. What do you think Lukashenko is expecting to achieve by trying to show a more friendly side to the West, at least pretending to?
This is the game, pretending, open to the West. Let's look at the actions. They conduct drills which very provocative scenarios, anti-Polish, anti-Poland, anti-Lithuania, with testing nuclear weapons, with testing Oreshniks. Let's look at at actions, not at words. Of course, he will be sending signals because he wants sanctions lifted. He wants Americans, to talk to him. Of course, he wants, some concessions. But Lukashenko, there are simple things you can do. Release people, release Andrzej Poczobut, Polish journalist, held in Belarusian custody. Stop supporting Russia. Stop sending and selling weapons to Russia. Show that your words are not just words, but actions. He doesn't do this because he's serving to Putin.
So why does Donald Trump and his administration actually want to talk to Lukashenko? After all, I mean, he's the same dictator as before. He keeps jailing people for expressing opinions different than his. As you also mentioned, he allowed Belarus to be used as a launchpad for Russian attacks against Ukraine. So why is he valuable to Washington all of a sudden? What is Washington hoping to achieve by engaging with him?
Humanitarian victory. For Trump, for American administration, it's important to save people's lives. Trump mentioned political prisoners in Belarus 3 times. Basically, this is the main goal as we see it in this communication. Because in general, Lukashenko needs Americans much more than Americans need Lukashenko. Because he can't do anything. But what he can do, he can release people. And that will be achievement for President Trump in Belarus. He will save people's lives. So I propose to see it primarily as the humanitarian effort and humanitarian operation.
One very quick question. Do you think that the Americans may want to win him over to perhaps do the same thing that they wanted to do with Russia and China, basically reduce the degree of cooperation and have perhaps not an ally, but at least a leader in this part of the world that has connections with Russia, but perhaps that he might also see the Western point of view?
In theory, it's possible, in theory, of course, it would be good, to split Lukashenko and Putin, to get Belarus out of this influence, of China's influence, but it's almost impossible. 80% of Belarusian trade goes through Russia. Lukashenko is completely dependent on Putin. This connection and this bond is so strong, it's impossible to change, and also mentality of Lukashenko is pro-Russian, and this way of thinking against democratic values, Putin and Lukashenko has the same. So I don't think, it's possible, to split these 2 guys, Putin and Lukashenko. They will be always helping each other. But, to get Belarusians and Belarusian society out of Russian orbit, this might be our goal. To make Belarusians more European, more connected to Europe, more pro-democratic, more anti-war. This must be our goal of the international community, of the democratic forces. We must not focus on Lukashenko only. We must focus on the society, 9 million people who can be, who are already allies to the democratic Europe.
Franak Viačorka was a guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for setting the record straight on Lukashenko's plans.
Thank you.
Now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Poland and Latvia have restricted airspace near their borders with Russia and Belarus. The decision comes in the wake of Poland's recent shooting down of Russian drones that breached its airspace.
Polish aviation authorities have informed that both drones and recreational aircraft will be prohibited from flying up to 3,000 meters along the borders of Belarus and Ukraine until December. This does not apply to commercial passenger flights as they operate at much higher altitudes. The new measures do not affect Poland's border with Kaliningrad. Latvia has also imposed similar restrictions along its borders with Belarus and Russia, with the Ministry of Defense saying that this will give NATO patrol aircraft and Latvian air defense the necessary freedom to be able to intercept unauthorized flying objects. Lithuania also decided to impose a no-fly zone along its border with Belarus last month, ahead of the joint Zapad 2025 military exercises between Russia and Belarus.
Amid heightened tensions following the recent Russian drone incursion into Poland, the Polish government is deploying 40,000 soldiers to its borders with Belarus and Russia.
A troop surge on the border was already expected due to Russia and Belarus carrying out the Zapad 2025 military exercises. Now these drills will be watched by NATO with even more scrutiny due to the recent incident involving Polish and Dutch aircraft shooting down Russian drones. Some political leaders fear that the Zapad 2025 war games could serve as a sort of precursor to Russian aggression against both EU and NATO member states. Other observers say that the drills are set to be at a smaller scale than those carried out in 2021, a few months ahead of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. In the last few years, over fears of possible Russian and Belarusian military provocations or aggression, Poland has fortified its borders with both Belarus and Russia's Kaliningrad.
Sweden has just announced a nearly $840 million aid package for Ukraine. The package includes a multitude of new equipment such as artillery, radar systems and secret gear meant to boost Ukraine's defenses.
Sweden is taking its NATO membership very seriously. In its 20th military support package for Ukraine, it intends to make sure that Kiev's forces can pack a serious new punch. The new aid delivery continues Sweden's long-term aid commitments, including annual military support of $3.6 billion between 2026 and 2027. As Russian forces have intensified their attacks against Ukraine in recent months and have been making some minor but steady gains, Ukraine's allies are becoming galvanized to help the Ukrainians push them back. Of note is the secret equipment that Sweden is sending to Ukraine, whose purpose and nature will not be revealed until it's been deployed on the battlefield, according to the Swedish defense minister.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates. I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Bye for now.